Howdy, howdy, guys. Today we're looking at the American Revolution and the road in which led us to the American Revolution. So, if you remember from last time, we were getting into the French and Indian War. And this war was between the British and the French and the Native Americans. This is also known as the 7 Years' War. And ultimately, the big losers in this war are Native Americans. They're going to lose land, they're going to lose lots of lives, they're going to lose some trading partners. Britain is going to rack up a ton of debt. Their debt has increased dramatically, and they're going to look for ways to pay this debt off. So, if you ever get in a debt, you might turn to family members or friends. You typically might turn to those around you and seek help from them before, doing something drastic or getting a second job or a third job or something like that. And in a similar fashion, the British are going to do a similar thing. They're going to turn to kind of their relatives and friends. They're going to look at the colonies to help them pay for this war. In the British's viewpoint, it is the colonies' responsibility to help pay for this debt because Britain helped them win this war. The colonies never asked them to fight this battle, but the British did it for them, and the British think, okay, well, we helped you out. It's time for you guys to help us out as well. So, this is where we're at today. Some acts start getting passed in the late 1700s. Starting in 1765, we get the Stamp Act. This is going to tax colonists on virtually every piece of paper, whether it's playing cards, business license, newspapers, and even legal documents. You would come in, you're there to buy a stack of playing cards, they're going to put a stamp on it, and you're going to get taxed for those playing cards. Is that fair? Not really. We could look at this similar today as a sales tax almost. We pay sales tax. You go to Walmart, you buy a candy bar says it's 99 cents, and you end up paying like $1.07 or something like that, right? That's a sales tax. We don't think much about it, but back then, this was something that was new, and people didn't like new. They don't like change, so they were very upset by the Stamp Act. This then led to the Townshend Act, taxing essentials such as paint, paper, glass, lead, and even tea. So this comes into play, and this is going to really upset the colonists. Okay, now you're getting taxed on your tea, you're getting taxed on glass, you're getting taxed on paint. So now colonists are going to start smuggling in their own tea. They're going to start smuggling in their own glass. They don't want to pay these hefty taxes, so they're going to kind of create a black market. Now, if you got caught smuggling, you are going to be punished severely, but this is a risk many people are willing to take because these taxes were not worth it. Similar things have happened as of late. You could look at New York. New York passed an extreme tax on cigarettes, and people from outside of New York were smuggling in cigarettes because the tax on them were so high, people couldn't afford them. So they started smuggling them in. So when countries do things like this, people will find ways to get around it, whether it's today or back in 1700s. All right, there's some questions for you to ponder about. Why is Britain imposing all these taxes on the colonies? Well, if you remember correctly, the biggest reason why is because they're trying to pay their debt off because of the French and Indian War. Okay, there's a poll. Okay, eventually we then get to Boston, or the British are going to send troops to Boston. The fighting begins after an unruly group of colonists. The group of colonists are throwing snowballs at the redcoats, the British soldiers. Some of these snowballs have oyster shells in them, and oyster shells are like sharp rocks almost. And some of them are just chucking oyster shells at them. The British are very upset by this, so someone shoots. We're not sure who shoots, but one guy shoots, and then several other guys jump in and they all shoot. One of the first victims is Crispus Attucks. He was a freed African American man. They're protesting, and he's one of the first victims of this. We call it a massacre. However, today we might look at this and go, is it really a massacre, right? Only 5 people are killed. Lots of people are wounded. But it is never okay for the military to attack essentially the people that they're kind of guarding, right? And this is what happens in this situation. So people are now very upset by this. You have newspapers running things like this on the death of 5 young men who were murdered on March 5th, 1770 by the 29th Regiment, the British Redcoats. So people are very upset. Then we get the Tea Act, which really just kind of pushes people over the edge. It pushes the colonists over the edge. They've had all these other taxes. They've had this massacre happen. Then this Tea Act comes into play. This is going to allow the British East India Company to sell tea to the colonists, but still the tax on the tea when it reached the colonial ports. Okay, so tea smuggling in the colonies is going to increase because of this. So people are very upset by this Tea Act. This is then going to lead us to the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party is a bunch of men who dress up as Mohawk Indians. They're going to board some ships. They're going to, like the stats say there, it's going to take them about 3 hours, and over 100 colonists empty the tea into the Boston Harbor. The chests hold more than 90,000 pounds worth of tea, which would have cost today about $1 million. So the British just lost $1 million worth of tea. They're very upset by this. They're very upset by this. Okay, and so obviously the colonists are very upset by everything going on. Then we get the Intolerable Acts or the Coercive Acts. Because of the Boston Tea Party, Britain is going to close the port of Boston. No more ships in, no more ships out. British officials accused of crimes would be tried in England. So like the British soldiers for the Boston Massacre, they were tried in America. From now on, those British soldiers are going to be tried in England because England wants to make sure they get a fair trial, quote unquote. So that upsets the colonists because British soldiers could commit crimes here and they're not going to be tried here. They're going to be tried over in England where they might be found innocent. British soldiers could be quartered in any home, meaning they can walk into your home and say, we're going to stay here. Okay, that's obviously not fair. And because of that, actually, one of our amendments tells us that we don't have to quarter any soldiers in our home. Massachusetts loses many of its rights to self-govern. So essentially, Britain says, Massachusetts, you're going to lose the Boston Harbor. Anybody who commits a crime against the colonists who's a British soldier or citizen, they're going to come back to England to receive a fair trial, and soldiers can now show up to your home. So the people are very upset. This will then lead the First Continental Congress to meet. George Washington says the cause of Boston now is and ever will be the cause of America. So the First Continental Congress meets to discuss common concerns. 12 of the 13 colonies were present. You had men such as George Washington, John Adams, Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry among those who attended this. At the First Continental Congress, discussions became difficult because of the colonial differences. Massachusetts and Virginia are the most outspoken colonies. Congress agrees to begin formal resistance of British acts. They're going to create a plan to arm and train militias in all colonies. So they're preparing for war. These are baby steps for war. They know the inevitable is coming. It hasn't quite shown up yet, but they're close. So they're going to start training farmers. They're going to train people who will become known as Minutemen, who are ready in a minute to go and attack. Congress is going to use John Locke's natural rights to reinforce some of their decisions. Most of their decisions are peaceful. Some are not, but most are peaceful. Colonies should resist trade until the Coercive Acts are repealed. They're going to petition King George III to make peace, and then they arrange for another meeting in late May. So we're slowly moving towards a crisis here. Members of Parliament take the colonists' side. You have William Pitt calls for British troops to be withdrawn. and King George III views the colonists as children. So King George has no respect for the colonists. He thinks they're a bunch of farmers, hillbillies. He has zero respect for them, and he believes that they need to be disciplined. So while Parliament believes that we should kind of ease up on the colonists, King George says no. So he wants to keep soldiers in America to enforce the laws even stricter. Okay, so he's not willing to negotiate with the colonists. Okay, in winter between 1774 and 1775, British soldiers are sent to Boston, more and more soldiers. Eventually, the soldiers are numbered 4-1. So you have one soldier for every 4 people. Okay, that's a lot. It may not sound like a lot, but there is one soldier for every 4 people living in Boston. To put it in perspective, Belton has about 25,000 people living here. Our police force is about 20 cops. Okay, so there's about a little over 20 cops for 25,000 people. Okay, we're nowhere near what kind of ratio the British soldiers had. In spring 1775, the British plan to raid militias, and they want to take their weapons. So the weapons are hidden at Concord, Massachusetts, near Boston. There are arrest warrants given and issued for Sam Adams. And this is where we're at. Okay, you have arrest warrants being issued for, what is considered one of our founding fathers. You have King George refusing to negotiate with the colonists. Things are coming to a boiling point, and it looks like it is inevitable that there is war on the horizon. And that is where we'll stop for the day.